Hello, YouTube land. This is Brenton coming to you from Lexington, Kentucky, the Bluegrass State. Before we get started, if anyone out there has a story they'd like to share here on the show, you can contact me at brentonsawin@gmail.com. I'll put that in the description, and you can look there to if you need to know how to spell everything or whatever. But it's my name plus gmail.com. Okay, if anyone wants to contribute to help with this show, you can go to a link in the description, PayPal me. It's really easy to use, and I appreciate every contribution that I've gotten. Now, today we have Jim Faulkner, who emailed me here last month, toward the end of the month, and he had some really interesting stuff, and I thought that you might enjoy this. So I think we're just going to go straight to him and get to it. And you're gonna like some of these stories, I'm telling you. Hello, Jim. How you doing, bud?
Doing great, Brendan. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and if you would introduce yourself and give a little whatever information you would like to, your full name and where you're at and stuff like that, and people kind of get a gist of the location and what have you. But I know that all the encounters that you've had aren't in the where you live now, so we'll kind of wing it as we go.
Okay. Well, I grew up in around Charleston, West Virginia, and grandparents raised me, and we also had a family farm. The great grandparents who were born back in late 1880s, and that's just a little background. And then my dad's family was from Kentucky, Stanton and Powell County, and then I spent a lot of time in Lexington. And ended up going to school in South Carolina. I met a girl from California. I moved to California, and then got into law enforcement out there and spent about 23 years in law enforcement, and eventually went back to West Virginia for about 2 years, and then moved to Oregon. So I'm up on the Oregon coast right now.
All right.
The story that I was going to tell was it's kind of it actually took years for this thing to develop. Back in 1979 or 80, I believe this is after I'd gone to college, and had a friend named Randy, and Randy had an old family homestead, and this is in West Virginia. Interstate 77 and 79 both run basically north-south out of Charleston, one up toward Pittsburgh, the other one kind of east toward Virginia. And this took place out of a town called Sissonville, actually where I went to high school at, and it's back roads going from the west over to the east. You'd actually could connect going from I-77 to 79. So this was in that back country that goes cross-country from one interstate to the other. And we decided it was deer season. I think it was probably late October, early November. And he had an old family homestead out in the middle of nowhere. And we decided to go deer hunting. Well, it took us, we went out of Sissonville cross country. And we kept going from an improved road down to a gravel road, down to a dirt road. And so it was out, I'm not quite sure the elevation. I think it was probably 1,000 feet because there was a lot of laurel and rhododendron and stuff like that. So we arrived at his old family homestead, and it was an old, nobody lived there for probably about 75 years or something like that. And the homestead was fallen down. I'm not sure. I think you could probably walk into the house part, but it was all caved in from the roof down. And it had a garden area that had been the family garden behind it, which would have been a little bit to the west. And then there were some creeks and a point of land and a couple hollows that ran up from the top of the hill down to the farm. And I walked, we kind of scouted it out a little bit, and I walked around, and there was some deer trails that ran from the head of the hollow, and it was a real small hollow. It's basically where a creek had eroded it all down. There's some waterfalls and stuff, and the creek was flowing. And there was an old, and this is probably about 75 yards west of the house, kind of uphill a little bit. and there was like an old log pig pen or something like that, maybe a root cellar, and some tall trees there, actually down in the bottom of the little hollow there next to the creek. And the deer trail ran from the top of where the creek was down toward the homestead, but it was about 50 yards, maybe 40 yards, kind of up the side of the hill above. If you were standing in the creek, you would look up to your right, and you'd see the deer trail paralleling the creek down. Well, we kind of scouted around a little bit. I think I walked up the creek, just seeing how far I could get up there and what it looked like. And so I identified the deer trail, and then went back the next morning. And it was probably 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it was dark. It could have been a little later than that, but it was still dark. In fact, it was pitch dark. And I used a little flashlight to locate a tree near the pig pen and or that little log structure, and I climbed up, and there was kind of like a little tree stand. So I was up probably 25 feet, maybe 30 or something, and I could almost look straight over from where I was sitting in the tree, and I would be looking right at the deer trail. And I thought, well, that's a great place to, have a good shot at it. It was still slightly uphill from me, but it was basically pretty straight on. Well, I was sitting there, and I had a 30-30 Marlin, and I'd been hunting my whole life, and ever since I was a little kid, and stuff, and I'd seen bears in the woods and bobcats and stuff like that, and foxes and everything, and I was familiar with just about everything that you run across. Well, like I say, it was pitch black, and I was sitting there. I wasn't making a sound, or at least I don't think I was. And suddenly, something screamed at me from this deer trail, exactly straight across where I would have been looking. And I was sitting looking that way, but like I said, it was pitch black. And I had never heard anything like that in my life. It was like a scream, howl, roar, all rolled into one. And I just immediately, I knew the thing was, whatever it was, it could see me, and it was pitch black. If you know how acoustics are, and if somebody's yelling and they're pointed away from you, how it sounds a lot different if somebody's turned toward you and they're yelling at you. This thing reverberated in my chest. It was just a huge, powerful. It sounded real angry, and this thing just roared at me, and it would have made no difference if I'd had a stick in my hand or if I'd had a rocket launcher. I knew I was pretty much screwed. Whatever this thing was, if it came down there and went to get up in the tree, which I almost thought that was going to happen, but it scared me to death. And I don't scare. I'm 6'3", 250, and I didn't quite weigh that much then, but I don't generally get too scared about things, especially if you've got a firearm. And this thing just, what's odd is I didn't hear any footprints. Now, the deer trail was just bare dirt. I don't remember any sticks or leaves or anything being on it. So I didn't hear any approach at all. And I had seen a deer the day before walking along that deer trail, so I knew they were heavily used. And I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to, or go blind. I had no idea. I was just shocked and frightened. And I just sat there, and of course I took my gun off safety. A little good that would have done, because I couldn't see anything. And I sat there until it got light. And as soon as it got light enough to where I could see, and I could see that there wasn't anything around me, I got down off the tree stand and walked around the point to where my buddy Randy was. And it wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't a bear. It sounded bigger if a sound could indicate the size of something. And it was so dark. Of course, I didn't see any eye shine. I didn't see anything. I didn't smell anything that I remember. And I know Bigfoots occasionally, will have a rank odor, but I don't recall smelling anything. And I just didn't know what it was. I was a complete and total shock. Well, I asked Randy, I said, Randy, did you hear that thing yell or scream at me? And he was like, yeah, I've never heard anything like that in my entire life. And I said, well, what do you think it was? And his response was, I have no idea. I've never heard anything like that before. And, it was just shocking to me. Well, time went on, and, I moved to California. I was in law enforcement, and we were in a county up near Yosemite National Park. And, in fact, 2/3 of Yosemite National Park was actually in our county. And we had deputies that were, up in the high country. And we got to talking about Bigfoot at some point, and I'd forgotten about this encounter. And one of the dispatchers was talking about a deputy named Albert Miller and another deputy that they were in a patrol car up in the high country, and it was in the summer. And they were in an area which was a ski resort. In the wintertime, it would be opened up in the late fall, and it would go through the winter. And they had driven around at nighttime into the deserted parking lot of ski area, and illuminated this huge big Sasquatch standing literally maybe 20 yards away. And it just scared them to death, and they locked the doors, backed out of there, and left. And you couldn't get Albert to talk about it. That was pretty interesting. And also, recalling back in West Virginia, I remember my great-grandfather and them talking about how they'd be walking down the country lane or riding horses or something, and that there'd be these panthers, and they called them panthers for some reason, I guess because of the screams and howls. And they were talking about how that they'd be going down the country lane, and it literally was out in the middle of nowhere. It's super rural right today. And these things would pace them. It'd be one on one side, one on the other side, up in the hills, and be pacing and walking along with them, howling back and forth. And they had never heard of a Bigfoot or even an ape or a gorilla or anything, I suppose. That must have been around 1910 or something. And they were talking about how these things would just scream back and forth and scare the living crap out of them. Flash forward to when I had moved to Oregon, and that was about 10 years ago. We live up on the coast, in the Coast Range. The mountains here go right down into the ocean, and where I live on a hill about 165 feet above the ocean, but I'm 300 yards back, but there's mountains all around us. And it's real woodsy with rhododendron, laurel, and stuff like that. Well, when I got here, I just, you hear about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and stuff like that from around in the newspaper and locals and stuff. And now I had completely forgotten about what had happened when I was deer hunting all those years ago, and didn't even think about it. So I happened to see this Sierra Sounds on the BFR website, and so I was just listening to the things, and all of a sudden I played one, and it was exactly the same thing that had screamed or howled or roared at me back in 1979 or 80. And my jaw dropped, and I had, like I said, forgotten everything about that, and all of a sudden, boom, it came right back to me like I was sitting in a tree right now. And it just literally sent chills down my spine. That I was like, oh my God, that is what I heard back then. You got to be kidding me. That had to be a Bigfoot. And I was just shocked. I mean, the memory just came back just like a big flashback. Well, I actually got on, I think I got on somewhere and called into the BFRO, and Matt Moneymaker with Finding Bigfoot actually called me back on the phone. I think I'd seen an episode of it, but I knew who it was. So he and I were talking about that, and I told him the stories. By then I talked to my brother, and he told me about the hairy man. My great-grandfather and his brothers were hunting back in West Virginia again, probably around 1910, 15, something like that. And they were hunting, and they said a hairy man, a huge, big, hairy man had charged them and chased them all out of the woods. And I had forgotten about that, too, until my brother was talking to me about it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's what you're talking about. Well, in talking to Moneymaker, I explained to him, the area I was in. And he said, well, in Ohio Valley, we've got a recording called the Ohio Howls, and there's a lot of truck farms and down that area, growing vegetables and stuff. And he goes, now your area especially, it's not too far from there, but he goes, any area that's got rhododendron, laurel, and deer and wildlife, especially an old abandoned farmstead, they seem to kind of congregate around those. And I had no idea. So, I mean, it was a perfect setup back then for me to run into something. It's just that I wished I'd been a little bit more prepared. I would have gone up and, checked for footprints, and I just didn't make the connection. I'd seen the movie Legend of Boggy Creek, so I knew about that, but I just did not make the connection. I really wished I had it, because that would have been, I could have made some castings, or I would have done something like that, because if I had known what it was, my mind was still trying to get around. It's got to be a bear, mountain lion, bobcat. It's got to be something like that. Even though I knew it was way too big for the sound.
Right.
And that was really shocking.
When you had the howl happen, and you said that you could feel it in your chest, that kind of made you know that wasn't just some regular animal, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And of course you see animals and you see interactions on TV and stuff, and this thing just sounded huge. There's no way that a person could yell or howl or scream as loud as this thing did. I mean, it wasn't coming for something small. I mean, I knew that.
Right. Now, let's see here. Now, when you finally did run across those recordings, I kind of know how that is, because I had the encounter that we were talking about earlier, and I eventually ran across the drawing in a book, and I seen what that was, and of course I've had a Bigfoot encounter also, but where I covered the stuff, I kind of figured what it was, but it's absolutely shocking when you figure out, it's like, oh my gosh, that is what I heard, or that's what I saw, or I'm saying that was a very shocking moment to me. So when you heard those sounds on the recordings and you realized what it was, how'd that make you feel? Like you were in way more danger than you knew you were, or what did you think about that?
Well, yeah, up to that point, I looked at a lot of grainy pictures and stuff like that, and being in law enforcement, I've done a lot of investigations and stuff. So I mean, when I get on Google and I start doing research, I just really do an in-depth deal, and you think, okay, that those are pictures, and then people tell you, 7 foot or 8 foot or 9 foot or whatever, and it's hard to wrap your mind around just how big that is, because when you go up in height, you also go out in width,
Right.
And those things are the way they're described. But when I heard that sound, I mean, I was pretty scared. I was terrorized when this thing yelled at me. I mean, my thought was that if it comes down here, whatever that is, and starts coming up this tree, you know, what in the world am I going to do? I mean, that went through my mind back then, and I knew whatever gun I had in my hand wasn't going to do me any good at all.
And you didn't even know it was a Bigfoot. I mean, that's incredible.
No, I had no idea. I just knew it was something that I'd never heard before, and I knew it sounded huge, and it was pissed off, and you know, it must have been walking along that, and I think it's part of the reason that, you know, that on Finding Bigfoot, those guys don't ever run into them, is, you know, they use thermal and stuff, but, you know, night vision, I mean, elk can see in the dark. There's a lot of animals that can see in that spectrum of light, and I know that's why that they don't have any success that they do, because that thing clearly, with being pitch black and the thing could see me, and clearly saw me and was agitated and yelled out a challenge. I wouldn't have known where to shoot, you know, and
right.
It was terrifying.
Yeah, and sometimes I try to explain a little bit, because people hear this, you know, 7, 8 foot, 9 foot, you know, they hear that a lot. But most people that are listening right now are sitting in a room that has 8-foot ceilings.
Right.
You know, unless you have 10-foot ceilings. But if you look at your ceiling and you've got just a little space above the door, you're in an 8-foot ceiling room. Imagine, as you're looking in your room right now, that the head is a foot above your ceiling.
Right.
And think that and it's wider than your door, because your bedroom door is probably 2.6 door or something like that. It's 2'6", something like. But typically, doors aren't in the interior of a house. They're not 3.0, which would be 36 inches. Most people that encounter these things say that their the shoulders are at least 3 foot wide, so there's going to be a foot or so past your door on width, and the head would be a foot above where your ceiling's at. Now just envision something that big. That is a monster. I mean, it's incredibly huge. The only time I seen one, it was from a distance, so I couldn't really tell how big it was, and it was kind of a little over the hill, so I could only see it from like the waist up. And it was really dark in the area that it was, so it looked like a black figure running from tree to tree. So I couldn't really gauge how huge it was. It looked like a black figure running from one tree to the next. You know, it kind of basically was moving across this where it was in the woods. It was so thick, it was dark back in there. Even though it was daylight where I was standing, I couldn't get a good make on, you know, or gauge on how big and what have you.
Right.
But you know, I've had people contact me. One girl contacted me here not too long ago, and she was very confused because she said, I hear people talking about seeing these Bigfoot, and they're 8 or 9 foot tall, something like this. But she said this one I saw was way bigger. She said this thing was more like 15 or 16 foot. She said it was so huge, she doesn't know what to make of it. She wanted to know what I thought. And this thing looked a little more human-like. Kind of like, but it was hairy. Not saying it wasn't hairy, but it had a beard, and you know, and kind of like a hairdo, somewhat. And I think she ran across the type that are usually way out in the wilderness. That there's a certain type that has a tusk that comes like
like a sagittal crest.
Not just a sagittal crest, but it has also like tusk coming up from the bottom.
Oh, tusks. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and kind of like teeth that come up that look like little tusk, and they have a kind of more Cro-Magnon, but they're still hairy all over, and they tend to be bigger and more aggressive. and she ran into one of these things. And some people call them mountain giants. They say that there's a different kind that lives, that they typically are way out away from people. It's rare people run into them, but I have run into a few stories to where someone was out kind of exploring, and they went across like a certain area when it was frozen that you typically couldn't get across. It was kind of a swampy area, but it was frozen at the time, and they ran into one of these type, kind of more humanoid looking, but still Bigfoot looking. Not saying it doesn't have hair and stuff, but it had kind of a beard like, kind of like a human would, and plus kind of hair also like on the head that came down a little further. And then, and it was really huge. And they had these tusk-like things that come up from, like the bottom jaw. It seemed like that you could see them,
Right.
And, so, I couldn't even imagine seeing something that big.
Well, I know that based on Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who's with, I think, Idaho State, he's got all those literally hundreds and hundreds of footprint casts, and from what I think he was saying is that based on extrapolating up from the size of the casts that they have from different areas of the country, that they're, and I think this is corroborated by another researcher, that they believe that there are 4 distinct different strains or subspecies of the Bigfoot in the United States, in North America.
Yeah. There must be something like that, because some that seem more kind of human-like,
Right.
and some that are just so, that are bigger like that, and then, then you have the ape-looking ones like the patty type, and
or the skunk ape down in Florida, and
right.
Then then it makes sense if you've got. I mean, there's no telling exactly. I think these things clearly migrate across from depending on the time of the year, et cetera, and it makes sense if they're more or less interbreeding within their tribe, or
right.
If they're tribal like that, how they keep distinct characteristics within their group,
Right, and if you ever watch any documentaries on like the great apes and stuff, they will have certain ones migrate to other tribes, depending on what the circumstances are. If the females think that the alpha male can provide better or lead better or something like that, the females will migrate over to another tribe. And and so there's and sometimes the alpha males die off, and that sometimes causes the great apes to kind of change around where they're going to go, and so that makes perfect sense. And plus, I think that they're making a rebound from when all the migration came to this country, and we brought disease and things like that. I believe that the population was knocked down just like the Native American, and in South America, people died off from disease that people brought from Europe and in other countries. And I believe that the Bigfoot population is bouncing back to bigger and bigger numbers, and more reports are being put out from every state in the United States except for Hawaii, because there's not going to be any Sasquatch that can swim that far, But,
the points you bring up are absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the Ebola virus, which I believe it started in the ape or chimpanzee and crossed over into the human population, and it makes perfect sense that it's smallpox or something like that, which wiped out a lot of Indian tribes. It would make sense that you'd have something that was that close genetically to a human being as far as DNA, that they would be susceptible to the same type of diseases that we have, and not having any natural immunity. That makes perfect sense to me. And of course, now that you have everyone just about getting inoculated and smallpox being eradicated, then I can see the same thing the Bigfoot population growing, and I agree with you 100%. Where I live in the Pacific Northwest, there's a huge elk population. It's Roosevelt elk. They're a subspecies of Rocky Mountain elk, and the terrain up here is just every little creek's got salmon in it, and it stays pretty much in the wintertime. The temperature stays to be in the 50s during the day because the ocean temperature is 54 all year round, and we're kind of like, it kind of backs up and warms up. We don't get freezing snow and ice and stuff like that where I'm at, and the habitat with laurel and rhododendron and salmon and deer and bear and elk. It's just crazy up here, and I know that from what I've researched here locally, there's a lot of people that have had encounters, and now they're starting to talk about it, where a few years back they wouldn't. And I think, especially with the loggers and stuff, I know that I've talked to a few, and it's amazing how prevalent it is once you get them talking about it.
Yeah, and I would suggest people get on Google and Google different states and look at the state parks.
Absolutely.
There is a lot of land that is not settled in this country, and I know a lot of people think, oh, we're encroaching on their land and things like that, but there are huge areas in every state almost that I know of. When I looked at Utah, I couldn't believe how much of that is set aside for state parks. National forests and things like that is
Nevada is practically the entire thing is federal land, and I think it's like 80%, 70-some%, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and like here in Kentucky, we have the Daniel Boone that goes from Ohio all the way through Kentucky into Tennessee, and they could go from 3 to 3 states and never even touch private property.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about something earlier about size and stuff, and I was going to interject, but then I forgot about it. But I saw a video of I think it was on Outlaw Radio or something like that. They had a video of a backside of a ranch house or farmhouse, and a Sasquatch, and it gave a good indication of the size. It was a 3-wire wire fence with T-posts. And this thing ran along the opposite side of it and then just stepped over the top strand. And for me, being even 6'3", there's no way I could do that, So, I mean, it gave a good indication of the height. So that thing was probably a good 9-footer right there. And I just remember that when you were talking about the size of them.
Well, yeah. It's unbelievable to think of that there really are creatures out there that are that big. Because, the bigger something is, you think you would, they can't stay hidden, but they do. They can be 10 feet from you, and you won't see them. They're that good at hiding.
They're the king of hide and seek. They win hide and seek like crazy.
I've got a little meme thing that is like hide and seek champion. It's got a Bigfoot, like on the what do they call it? The beef jerky commercial, It's like champion.
Yeah, messing with Sasquatch. Yeah, exactly.
It's got one of those dudes sitting there, and it's like hide and seek champion.
Yeah. My grandfather when he said that the hairy man ran him out of the woods, I was too young to get specifics and even wonder about that. I just knew it was crazy. And now there's some people that did. There was a place called Booger Holler, and back in the southern part of West Virginia. I'm not quite sure which county, maybe Lincoln County, but they did call them boogers, and I know that's prevalent down the farther south. But it also remind me of the story I think I told you about the guy that was carrying the hearse in the wagon.
Yeah, that was one I was wanting to get to, because that's interesting, very interesting. But when you talk about Booger Holler, even in other states, they have places called Booger Holler. Yeah. I think there was a guy from, I can't remember what state it was now, but there was another state that was, it might have been Mississippi, and they have a place called Booger Holler.
Mississippi, Alabama, something like that. Yeah, that rings a bell.
Yeah, and he was in a camper, and he had these Bigfoot creatures coming up and slapping the camper and stuff like that, And he's had a few other encounters, like near the. There's this one place where there's these dumpsters, and you can take your stuff and throw it in these dumpsters, and he went to these dumpsters a couple different times, and one of them would be at the dumpster, and it would jump out of the dumpster and run off, and that kind of stuff. And and so they were scared to go to the dumpsters at nighttime because they would go there, and these Bigfoot would be there, and it was right around this area that was called Booger Holler, and so yeah. But anyway, yeah, let's get to your that story of the hearse deal, because that to me was one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly when this occurred, but it occurred back in the horse and buggy days, and this came from my great-grandparents too. And there was a story about a guy that would I guess there was a cemetery just a long way off, and he'd made several trips to this, and generally he would stop halfway, and he would get the grain out of the back of the wagon. It was apparently covered. It wasn't a covered wagon, but it was. I got the impression it was like a big hearse, and or a big something that you haul freight in. And he would stop halfway and stop and get out. And I'm guessing this took several hours to just to get that far. And he would go back and get the grain, and he would come forward, and then he would grain the horses, and that was a halfway point. And then he'd continue on to the cemetery. And I would imagine there's people with him, to offload the casket, but that wasn't addressed, so I'm not sure. The only thing I know is that one time he was had a casket, and the story was the guy that had died had been a very evil man, and that could be embellishment later on, but that was a story that this guy had been an evil person and not very well liked, and so this guy was transporting in the wagon. They had the casket in the back, and he got to the halfway point, and these were just rutted dirt roads back there, in deep woods and hills, and he stopped and went back to get the grain out of the back of the wagon, and he said he came around the corner and looked up, and he said, now his description was that it was the devil, and he said the devil was hairy and had red glowing eyes. It was 9 feet tall, and it had the grain bucket, and it was eating the grain out of the bucket in the back of the hearse. And I guess it scared him pretty good. And I don't know, at some point he went back around and got in the wagon, and I don't know, whether this thing had gotten out of it or what, but he continued on at some point. And the story was that, he never got a chance to grain the horses because the devil was back there sitting on this guy's casket, eating the grain out of the grain bucket. And
that's crazy.
I remember that as plain as day. Of course, they always told us those stories when it was nighttime anyway,
Yeah.
But, I put two and two together, and I was sitting there thinking, that's got to be what they were talking about. And a man who had never seen a gorilla or anything, all he saw was this big human-looking thing that was 9 feet tall, had glowing red eyes, and I would guess, maybe it was getting late in the afternoon, and it scared him so bad, he wasn't going to fight this thing for the grain bucket,
right.
and did grain the horses, and that story was something else, and
but there's a lot of people that will see a Bigfoot and they'll think it's the devil. There was a fellow.
I would.
There was a fellow that came on. He was from Florida, and his parents had put all these different locks and stuff on the door,
right,
to the house, and they were always talking. They had these like little homemade alarm things with pans and stuff like that hanging.
Oh yeah,
to where if something hit it, it would make noise. And he remembered one time that his parents had these people over playing cards, and he remembered the mother at one point saying that the devil is out there on the porch.
Wow.
And so he kind of remembers all this stuff, these kind of different scenarios and what have you. But one night, they didn't have the door locked, and they didn't have that, the pans and stuff hanging. And he said he was in his bunk bed. His brother was on the bottom bunk. He was on top bunk. And one of these things came in the house. And he woke up, and the thing was standing there by his bunk bed, looking at him, staring at him.
Look, I have to interrupt you. My phone's about ready to die on me. I might have to have you give me another call back and let me answer the different phone. The battery's going out on this thing.
Okay. Well, if it goes out, I'll call you back. Anyway, he said this thing was standing there, staring at him, and he was freaked out. He didn't know what to do. And the next so he kind of hid under the blankets, and it went away, and so he didn't even get up or nothing. But the next morning he got in trouble because there was sand tracked from the front door all the way into his room, and then back out and what have you. And and he tried to explain, and he got in trouble, for lying because they thought he tracked the sand in, and so anyway, I thought that was a very interesting story because they were saying this thing was the devil. So anyway, they thought this thing was some type of devil there invading their house, and the kid knew that it was a Bigfoot came into his room and stuff, and even though the parents had seen this thing, it's kind of hard for a parent to believe a kid saying, thinking it was in the house at the bunk bed and tracking the sand in and stuff like that. But anyway, so I mean, what do you think about these creatures being in the woods in so many different states and growing in numbers and things like that? Do you think that it'll ever come out to where the general population knows more and more about this, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think with the internet and the way things are now, I mean, there's just with your channel and the others that you see on YouTube, the stories that you hear about, especially locally, and even with the DNA evidence and stuff like that, it seems like Meldrum has had it come back as a unknown primate. And then you got Dr. Jane Goodall, who lived in Africa with a tribe of gorillas, and the things that are typically associated with the Bigfoot, typical ape behavior like breaking branches and tree knocks and throwing sticks and even up to bluff charges and stuff like that. I mean, when she was asked about what she thought, she said, yes, I believe she called it a wood ape, and she said it was some sort of wood ape, and you've got forensic fingerprint specialist and a guy down in Texas whose law enforcement career was basically, if dermal ridges on feet are just as unique as individual fingerprints, and on humans they run one way on a footprint, and these run the opposite way, which is what it does for apes. But I think, I think they're probably, with all the farms and stuff like that, and especially when you got people, habituating them, and by that I mean putting food out and things. There's a lot of stories around that. How these people will think, oh, they're just these creatures, and they're benign, they're not going to hurt us, and they put food out. I have one friend that lives down in Middle Tennessee, and he was talking about how, that they had always taken their scraps and stuff out and dumped them in the woods for the creatures. And by creatures, he just meant like porcupines and possums, stuff like that. And then he starts getting these howls, and the things actually got to the point where they were banging on his trailer, the side of his mobile home, because he hadn't put any food out. And there's a lot of people that do that, and I think in certain areas, populated areas, these things are probably, I'm just guessing, are getting used to humans in those areas. But I think it's just like any other population of any other animal, with so much food and stuff. I think they're probably at least staying stable, if not growing. But it's just surprising. Like Matt Moneymaker was talking about all the truck farms, which I've been to along the Ohio Valley there with my uncle. Acres and acres of corn, and you can't drive down the road without seeing a bunch of deer. I counted 26 deer that had been hit by the side of the road along there. So the deer are eating, eating the vegetables and the corn and stuff, and the Bigfoot were either preying on the deer, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, they're just foraging food and stuff around.
Right.
So I think they probably are increasing.
Yeah. Eventually, I think it's going to get too much to hide, and I think that the Bigfoot has got a lot more human-like intelligence because of the way sometimes they'll recon people's houses.
Oh yeah.
They're looking in the windows, and they're if they slap the house, they kind of know where you're going to go.
Right.
They can see if you went to go to the get the gun, and then they'll go to the front door and wait. And things like that. Listening down the chimney, like that case in Kentucky that I had. It's crazy. Or when you come out your front door, you'll hear a tree knock, and then there'll be a knock across the ridge, and they're too smart. Regular apes aren't that smart. These things are smarter than an ape. They're ape-like. They're ape-like, it seems like, for sure, because they do a lot of things like apes do. But they are human-like with the intelligence, and they're just too smart. There's so many different things that we find out that listening to all the different stories and stuff. And
apparently they've got a language. There's a guy who was I think he was in the Navy, and he was a linguist or something like that, and he had listened to some of they call it samurai chatter. I think it was on the Sierra Sounds.
Yeah.
And he said it definitely was a language. And I just read an account just the other night about a guy who said these things were jabbering back and forth when he was camping with his dog, and that was here locally. There's a bunch of stories that I found. Even places that we used to fish, a place called Odell Lake. Some folks went up there around Christmas time for their honeymoon, and kept seeing footprints in the snow, and lo and behold, the lady looks up one night at the kitchen window, and the thing's looking right back at her, and she got a detailed description of its facial features and skin tone around its eyes and everything like that, and that's a place, Odell Lake. We've gone fishing there and camping there many times, and I'd walked up into the woods on a little hike that I used to do, and that's in the, you're almost in Central Oregon by then, and it's kind of like, they call it the high desert, but it's mountains with snow on the top and ski resorts and pine trees and everything else, and there's lots of them. With clearly they got some way of communicating back and forth, which I don't recall ever hearing apes or anything like that having that type of ability. So.
Right, yeah, and the linguist guy, he was a Navy intelligence officer who analyzed. He was a crypto something or another.
Exactly.
And he knew it was a language. And what was interesting is that he would slow it down and listen to it. and it helped him realize that they were talking. And the Sierra sounds, there was actually one of the recordings where he thought that they actually tried to slow down their language to communicate with those people. And so it was kind of like their brain was firing faster or something like that. You know, it was like,
right.
You know, they were throwing out that, you know, how they, it was real fast sounding. And then they would try to actually slow it down so they could communicate with those people that were, you know, there and inside their tents, scared and stuff, you know.
Right.
But yeah, very fascinating stuff, and I'm sure that, you know, over time we're gonna learn more and more about it. And
well, I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, there's one outfit down in Texas that their goal is to just actually kill one, and their point was, well, you know, no, we don't want to kill one, but it's the only way that science is ever going to, you know, when you take a body back, they're actually going to realize that it is just a, you know, a creature that's out there in the woods. And
right.
I mean, when you read, there's just been hundreds and thousands of people, eyewitness sightings, you know, and photographs now, and good grief, you see all that stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a matter of time, probably very quickly. Going to be the point where they finally realize that it is a species of ape, you know, or some primate like that.
Yeah. I've got a few pictures that I wish I could release, but I was asked not to. Man, I would really like to, though, that are really very interesting pictures. I can show them in private to people, but I can't really put it out on the internet.
Right.
It would get me in trouble, and I'd lose my credibility and what have you. No one would share anything with me. But he said you can share it with people individually, you know. Very, very strange looking creature. I'm not kidding you. And, yeah, for real. But anyway, you know, there's people who sends me stuff all the time. I got a few pictures I'm looking at right now that looks like one's hiding in some tall grass. You know, and I was going to see if I can clean it up and if it was worth doing something with, and we'll see. You know, over time, more and more stuff comes out. And there's actually some really good footage of Bigfoot out there, but people always try to debunk it, you know. And
yeah, they do.
And it's not all fake. I'm telling you.
Well, you've seen the one up in Washington. I think it's called the Memorial Day footage or something like that. It's the one where the folks were down at their campers in this turnout, and then they look up on the hill, which is mostly grass with just a few scrub trees, and they took their camera and wondered who that was up there walking, and took a picture of the thing, and it actually takes off running across the hill, at least 100 or 200 yards, and they had a picture of that, and that's pretty clear.
Yeah, no, there's stuff out there that looks pretty darn good, man. I'm telling you, and people, you can't just fake that stuff so easy. You can tell a fake pretty quick, because the Bigfoot walks and runs, has a different kind of gait. It doesn't have a human gait.
Yeah, they step heel to toe almost, and kind of swing their knees around.
Yeah, and if you look at the head doesn't bob up and down like when a human walks or runs.
No,
our heads will go up and down. When a Bigfoot runs, his head stays level. So if you were to get some footage, you draw a line across the, you know, I can analyze the footage and I'll put a line across it and see if the head's bobbing. I'm not saying it wouldn't bob at all, but it doesn't bob like a human on every step, you know. And,
right.
So, very interesting. But anyway, thank you, Jim, for coming and sharing. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I was glad to do it. I just wanted to send you that email and let you know some of the stuff. And you know, if you're ever out this way, maybe I've met a guy just the other day that goes out here locally, and he wants to get with me and go out. But you know, that's going to be a few months away. So we'll
sure, you got my number and stuff, man. So anytime you want to holler, and I got yours. So we'll stay in touch, and maybe something like that would be possible here this year.
Well, I'm planning on coming back there at some point, maybe in the fall. I've once I got a broken ankle, so once my ankle heals up and everything, I want to come back and see my mom. And if I do, and I'm in Lexington, I'm going to come by and knock on your door and irritate you for a little bit.
Oh man, dude, if you down here in my neck of the woods, certainly holler. For sure,
yeah,
man, that would be great, for real. But hold on the line there, everybody out there in YouTube land. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I thought it was some pretty fascinating stuff, and I love the old time stories, man. That to me is some of my favorite stuff. So, like I said, if you want to share something, you go to brentonsawin@gmail.com. If you want to contribute, you can go to the link in the description. PayPal me, and I appreciate it. Everyone who has helped, and until the next time, God bless you, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.